Okay, class. So today we're talking about one of my favorite poets, Langston Hughes. Um, Now, Langston Hughes was part of the Harlem Renaissance. As you know, some of our other authors we looked at, Zora Hurston and Jean Toomer and Cullen. But where those people wanted to work with, either traditional experiment, literary patterns, forms, stuff like that, Langston Hughes wanted to capture more of the oral and improvisatory traditions of African American culture in the in written form. So he was mostly raised by his grandmother and kind of bounced back and forth between his mom and his dad, who had kind of had a bitter separation. And he had a very contentious and brutal relationship with his father, who moved to Mexico to escape, um, racism because he was just kind of disgusted with America. And his mother moved. I think she lived in Detroit and Cleveland for a while, and so she supported him and his poetry. I don't think the father did so much. But anyways, he was a big part of the Harlem Renaissance, probably the most influential male figure of the Harlem Renaissance. And um, Langston Hughes is really cool. He kind of insisted on the need for courageous artists to kind of make to be for artists to be courageous and to produce art that deals with racism and racial issues. He was called the Bard of Harlem. I don't know if you guys know what the witch hunts were in America during what they call the McCarthy era, but we after World War II, anybody who was interested in any kind of political system or economical system outside of capitalism and democracy was rounded up. Some people were killed as traitors. Some people were thrown in jail for life. And there were a lot of famous people like Arthur Miller, the guy who wrote, the Salem witch trial. What's I forget that. I'm just going brain dead. The name of the play where the girls say everybody's a witch and they start burning everybody. Anyways, um, so a lot of people like that were rounded up by McCarthy in question, and for being suspected of being involved with socialism or communism or whatever. And so the FBI actually had labeled him as a security risk because he had traveled to Russia and Europe and was learning about these alternative political and social systems and economic systems. And so when he got popped for that, the FBI had him on a list. He couldn't leave town. I mean, he couldn't leave the country anymore. He was, on a travel list. And then he kind of focused on writing some more poetry about America, a little bit more patriotic poetry, and that kind of got him off of it. He questioned whether or not anybody here. Let me read this for you because this is a quote from the Norton. Um, Hughes faced many difficulties in writing a self-proclaimed Negro poetry. Could or should any individual speak for an entire race? If he or she tried to, wouldn't that speech tend to homogenize and stereotype diverse people? Harlem poets, aware that the audience for their poetry was almost all white, had to consider whether a particular image of black people would help or harm the cause, and that affected their poetry. To the extent that they felt compelled to idolize black folk, their work risked lapsing into racist primitivism. African American writers questioned too whether their work should emphasize their similarities to or differences from whites. Hughes' response to these problems was to turn his focus from the rural black population of his early poetry toward a more urban folk. The shift to the contemporary urban context freed Hughes from concerns over primitivism. And primitivism basically means, kind of like the Tarzan effect. The more rural or the more separated from civilization you make somebody, the more pure they seem to be. It's called The Noble Savage. You might have heard, like John the Savage in that in Brave New World. Anyway, sorry, back to the Norton. Let's see. The shift from contemporary urban context freed Hughes from concerns over primitivism. He can now be a realist and a modernist. He could use stanza forms derived from blues music and adapt the vocabulary of everyday black speech to poetry without affirming stereotypes. And he can insist that whatever the difference between black and white Americans, all Americans were equally entitled to liberty, justice, and opportunity. Okay, so this is a poem I want to talk about first, and it's called Theme from English B, and I love it. And, I'd love to read this to you, but, because all poetry should be heard. But this is one of Langston Hughes' major themes. And you notice there's no real rhyme scheme, it's kind of doing its own thing. It's free verse. But basically, he gets an assignment from his white professor who says, I want you to go home and write a page and let it come out of you and let it be true. And then the whole, kind of poem the paper or theme, theme meaning essay assignment, and also the theme, like a literary theme, is that there are how alike Americans are, both white and black, and how as he as a student learns from the professor is also learning from him. It's an exchange of knowledge. And so it has a larger context to America in general, to race relations. And I just always have liked that poem, and I think it's wonderful. Um, this poem, you can see, is where he leans a little bit more probably towards primitivism. It has heavy repetition, heavy chant, an incantatory effect. If you notice, all the areas that are listed are all places where civilization, sprung up and and was built by slaves. If you guys aren't aware of this, there is no civilization in the world that wasn't built on the back of a disposable workforce. Most of the time, slaves, other times peasants. You literally can't name one anywhere in the world historically. Um, so we have that connection here, and the idea of the connection to rivers and the flow of life and blood and kind of themes here, and all of this kind of fits into individualism and the self and identity that's popular in modernism. uh, Let America be America again. you know this is one of my favorite poems because it's kind of about the American identity, the idea of what we think America is and its history is, the perfect founding fathers versus the actual kind of reality of what it is and the kind of blood and guts that this country was built on. And it's kind of a prayer to let, of that main theme he speaks of everybody being equal, and kind of let America be America again is kind of like, well, let's let this country be what we were taught it was as kids, that it was somewhere where everybody's equal and everybody has a fair chance. And it's not like that at all in terms of race or in terms of economical issues. You have the you're not likely to rise up out of your socioeconomic status less likely now in this day and age than any other time in American history, which is kind of sad. And anyways, so you can see again the heavy chant, the incantatory effect that's very common with native native writers, and we see it used a little bit here by Langston Hughes. And it is a wonderful poem. There's plenty of research out there on it, but anyways, I just wanted to kind of introduce you to Langston Hughes a little bit and just look at his techniques. Some of his poems, we don't have many here that go into formalism. Most of them are free verse, most of them are experimental. We have repetition, and we have also the idea of the individual. He's writing a lot about the individual, but he also moves towards larger social concerns. But anyways, I hope you enjoy this poem.